27. Thursday, 14th of August 2025. Although he could not place it, Locrian felt a pervading sense of dread hanging in vapours about the morning, that a split in the corridor approached, and choosing the wrong direction to look first would leave him vulnerable to any beast that might lurk around the corner. Beneath him, his feet proceeded involuntarily up the timber steps with great care made to avoid making a sound. There were enough hints of it anyway. A muttering of voices, a scratching at the walls, the wind seeking concealment in the darkled corners of the house which shuddered in protest of its touch. Within the walls of his head, Locrian's pulse pounded, the throb of his blood churning out a rhythmic chanting of voices that echoed out in an insomniac's rondo. The fractured sleep he'd gathered throughout the week had pressed him into waking hours plagued with heightening anxiety. Still came the muttering of voices, of moths shaking clotted wings on the borders of his blurred reality, and one voice that he recognised as his sister's came muted from behind the cheap gyprock walls of the second story. It was her voice, her sample of sounds meeting his strained ears in a half of conversation, for she spoke to somebody that he himself could not discern. She had locked herself into the dusty confines of her old bedroom, and from out behind the shield of those childhood belongings she impressed upon the unknown conversationalist a voice firm and reasonable, seasoned with fear. "I've told you what I need to do." Silence. "That's the plan. I can't." Silence. "If you would please listen." Silence. "I can't control that. Can't click fingers." Silence. "You know how to do that. You don't need me there to..." Silence. "Of course I miss her. Don't be ridiculous." Locrian caught himself eavesdropping and shook his head. He knew he shouldn't intrude on private conversations. The sound of Leah's footsteps started suddenly, and he frantically slipped into his own bedroom. If she saw him, he could say he was looking for something. The door opened just as his foot struck against a pile of books that clattered on the floorboards. "All sorted with the solicitor," said Leah, as though she'd already known her brother was there. "He'll meet us in Queanbeyan this morning." "Is that who you were talking to now?" "Huh? You eavesdropping?" "Sorry, I heard your voice and thought I'd check." "You're a terrible liar, bro." She was downstairs before he could say anything, noisily searching the kitchen cupboards as though she'd never moved out. The child-made coffee cup remained on the same shelf where Lockie had found it the other day, and she clasped at it with a smile. "That's adorable," she said. "We're going to find a lot when we go through everything." I couldn't believe he still had it. "Look, you didn't even spell your name correctly on it." "What do I know?" He laughed nervously. Then, to change the topic, "Sleep okay?" Leah shrugged. "Reckon there's rats in the walls. Barely slept out of fear of being eaten alive." "Well," he replied, "thank God for another day, am I right?" She wasn't listening, continuing to rummage through the pantry. She procured a pair of wine bottles coated in dust. "Thank God," she smirked. "This will be required later today. Care to join me?" Lockie stammered. "Relax, Lock. No alcohol, I know. I'll drink your share. Bloody well needed after the week I've had." She looked at her wristwatch. "You know what? Let's just grab something to eat along the way." There were very few cars on the road towards Canberra. The grey sky blanketed the countryside with its watercolour strokes, above the pen-scratched sepias of dishevelled highlands that lay oppressed beneath. Leah drove the Corolla, and Lockie had been more than willing to oblige, as there was not much that could calm the anguished irritation that taunted at him from the shadows. The road wound through the fields in wide arcs, seemingly never closer to the destination, with the low-lying cloud cover continuing to crush any hope of serenity. For each turn of the wheels was a step towards uncertainty. Alongside the road, the rail tracks lashed the hills, with rusted minecasts locked to their path. They could surge forward into the darkness of the tunnels, or be static in a paralysis of function, doomed to remain or retreat. much as Lockie was chained to his car seat with words forever unspoken dancing at the back of his throat. Things looked different from this vantage point in the passenger seat. He'd owned the car for so long, yet he rarely sat there. To see the slant of the dashboard from another perspective, the other side of the owl figurine that sat beneath the windshield, he felt closer than ever to a certain abyssal maw that loomed forth. His shadow had continued to follow, and would soon overtake him if he did not confront it. Leah had noticed his vexation, choosing to attribute it to the grief of mourning, for her own burden had become too heavy, and she was reluctant to shoulder any more turmoil, even if it was her brother's. "I like the owl," she offered. Locrian turned his head away from the passenger window. "Oh, a friend gave it to me." "You need a friend who'll buy you a new car. I can't believe you still have the Corolla." "It still works, I guess." "Took me a sec to remember manual cars still exist. You don't forget how to drive stick." "People remember what they want," he said. "They forget the rest." They found themselves travelling uphill at a glacial pace, stuck behind an enormous semi-trailer that spluttered its way forth. Leah huffed impatiently. "Stresses me out, those bloody things. I can't see around it to overtake." Lockie closed his eyes and tried to slow his heartbeat. "I want to ask a stupid question, sis," he said. "I should know the answer to it, but humour me. Did Dad ever meet Georgia?" "Only a few times," she replied wistfully. "I don't think she understands what's happened to her grandfather. Too young. She would have been 3 when she saw him last, so I guess there's a chance she doesn't remember him at all." "A chance?" "I had this foolish idea in my head that I'd show up at Dad's place and he'd just fix everything, you know." "Oh?" "I don't know why. I chose to believe it, I suppose," she added. "Then I get here yesterday. It was so quiet. Nothing that I had dreamed, yet everything I should have expected." "And what should you expect?" She thought for a moment. "If I knew the answer, I wouldn't have to dream." Under the dull drapery of the grey day, a town like Queanbeyan issued no mirth, and why should it? A rural city turned outer suburb of Canberra was under no obligation on any idle weekday to impress its visitors with anything more than a passing glance, an acknowledgement of one's existence, so long as that one would stay in line. The sky had threatened to rain all morning, yet had so far spared the tired landscape of its sleet. The CBD was a thoroughfare, inviting few folks to stop, preferring to remain unnoticed with the veiled threat of minding one's own business. The Corolla came to a stop right outside the building, Leah and Lockie moving swiftly to remain in the cold air for as little time as necessary. With a thrusting of burning hands into pockets and scarves pulled tighter about their person. The office of Mr. Bell Chambers was another in a line of bleary rooms, where open-door policy and glass walls was meant to give rise to camaraderie, but instead gave off the impression of a zoo. Here was the local businessman in his natural habitat, of wasted paper and ink, of pens that never worked when you needed them to, the laminated cardboard of name tags held to office doors with blue tack, as though to name the man would give him purpose, could so quickly be removed and replaced by the next employee to wander into that trap, and Bell Chambers himself was a man who needed no first name, for nobody really cared one way or another. "Another Smith," he gestured them to sit before his desk. The smell of mint failed to conceal the exhalations of the morning's coffee, and both brother and sister silently endured the cud-chewing of the man's gum rolling about in that sickly mouth. "Can you do the talking?" Lockie's expression conveyed to Leah. "Let me do the talking," was her own thought, as neither of them spoke aloud. "We're not entirely sure of the process with all this," she said. "But our dad has passed away and we needed to see his will." Bell Chambers' head was turned downwards to his keyboard, eyes looking from under furrowed brow at Leah. "Are you the executor of the estate?" Leah shrugged. They were words Dad said to me. Not that I know what it all means. Kinda hoped you'd share a bit of your expertise there. Right, the man's chest puffed. Let's see what we have here on file. Lockie nudged his foot against Leah's, rolling his eyes subtly once he'd caught her attention. A sticky clacking of keys filled the rooms, bouncing off the glass walls as nameless employees drifted past, each taking their moment to glance emotionlessly at them. Lockie could hear Leah's breath whistling softly through her nose. The fluorescent buttons above them flickered sporadically, although both Leah and Bell Chambers seemed not to notice. Revocation, Bell Chambers muttered. Trustee, you are the daughter, Leah, blah blah blah, standard stuff. Locrian shifted in his seat. One of the armrests was broken and he had no idea where to place himself. He crossed his legs both ways, placed his hand on his chin, leaned forward, but could not find his equilibrium. The voice of the solicitor dropped to a barely audible murmur. A dull vibration rattled at Lockie's chest, underlain and baritone. A photocopier ground out its industrial moan from somewhere nearby. Again the lights dimmed, and he looked to both his sister and the solicitor for recognition, but neither of them paid any attention to the darkness that shrouded the office. The green of the exit signs, the red of the emergency lights. The sounds he heard were muffled, as though he were underwater, held together by that drone of machinery, a tearing of paper, the somewhat archaic tones of landline phones ringing. If only someone would notice him, see his torment, validate his suffering. He looked next to him to where his sister sat, and saw she had been replaced by another woman, her face shrouded in death-deep umbra. She turned her head towards him as he choked on a scream that issued forth in a pathetic whimper. He leaned to where the missing armrest should have been and fell off the chair with a thud. In a flash, the lights were back on. The normal sounds of the office on a Thursday morning returned, and Leah was kneeling beside him. "The fuck's wrong with him?" asked Bell Chambers. "Lock," said Leah. "Lock, what happened?" The solicitor was plainly irritated at having to pry hospitality from his slackened sense of appeal, clicking his fingers at the receptionist who looked in at them with concern. "Can we get some water in here or something?" Bell Chambers asked. When he had gathered himself properly, Locrian blushed with humiliation. I'm fine, please. Not necessary." "I told them these chairs were a death trap," said the solicitor, clearly wishing only to defend himself. "I have it in writing." "He said he's fine, thank you," said Leah firmly. Bell Chambers stood and placed his fingertips on the desk. "Why don't I get you lot a copy of this will? You might prefer to read it in your own time." "Lockie," said Leah, "what do we do now? Dad has said he doesn't want a funeral."